No takers.
1400, the AD enters the room.
Here, you might be early.
No, I'm exactly on time.
That's better than Steve, and he's normally about an hour late.
Wait, I think he may have some conflicts.
Doesn't matter whether he's got conflicts or not, he's normally about an hour late.
So good afternoon. Welcome to Europe. Welcome to Prague. This is a SACM meeting. I am Dan Romascano, and he's
Adam Montville.
and we are co-chairing the second working group. So let's get started. Note well. So everybody should be very familiar at this point in time. When we register for the meeting, we signed for this note. Important information. There are some pointers on this slide, but of course, if there are any questions or clarification issues, please address the chairs and or the area director. And if there is any disclosure or statement that you would like to make, you can make it at any time during the meeting or using the mail list. Admin tasks, blue sheets are circulating. 2 note takers, Chris and Danny, 1 Jabber scribe, Jim. So we are all set. I believe that we have a remote participation ongoing with Meet Echo. If any of the remote participants wants to make statements, draws the attention, please use the Jabber room in order to let us know. Okay, this is the agenda. As we have done for the last few meetings, we are meeting twice during the IETF session. So the first meeting is usually on Monday, and this meeting. The second one, during this meeting, we actually set the work of a few design editorial teams, which will be working during the week, and will be planning during this session what work to do and give them missions and charters. And the second meeting will take place on Friday, and this time it's actually Friday, the very last session of the IETF meeting. So this is a good test for whoever is very committed to this working group and will show up on Friday afternoon. This is the agenda for today. I actually have already a bashing request from Linda, who is asked to be first in the agenda, but she's not on the room. So whenever Linda will come, we'll try to accommodate her request, but will not delay too much waiting for her. So if anybody wants to further bash the agenda, please do it. And if not, we'll actually proceed with the second requirement, start the second requirements discussion, and then when Linda shows up, we'll see what we do. So, Lisa? Oh, we want to do the work with stuff. You are right. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Lisa is all right. Okay. Working group status. So we have the use case approved, document approved. It's in the RFC editor queue. So thanks to Dave and to everybody else who helped run through the comments and resolve the 2 pending issues. Milestones. Okay, it's time to use the color red, because obviously the working group last call for requirements, the one that was started, still judged by some as kind of too early. And certainly it will not be the last one, as it seems. But we'll hear more from Lisa. And we did not start the working group last call for architecture, so no chance to finish it by July, and will not submit the requirements because we'll certainly need another working group last call or some time to resolve the open issues that will immediately run through. So we are still work to do. We still have work to do on these two matters, and please help.
Kathleen Moriarty, Dan, would you mind going back to your agenda slide? Do we have any protocol submissions that we're going to review? I know that there's at least one protocol submission that's come to the working group. Are we going to be discussing that today or on Friday, since we're going to be adopting one in November? We have a reasonable candidate. Maybe we could think about adding the XMPP grid to one of the agendas this week. Is that possible?
Hasn't changed since the last time we discussed it.
Right. Does the working group need to think about this, and I'm actually going to bring it up at the plenary, on the tech plenary on Thursday, because of discussions in other areas and other working groups. So give you a heads up that I will be.
Let me try to reformulate this. Do you have enough people willing, interested, and having also some time to discuss the XMPP grid submissions this week, and try to do a kind of report or assessment about how it stands relative to the requirements?
So it's Chris Nacio. I can do the review, but I also think that, if I'm not mistaken, Nancy couldn't make this meeting.
Oh.
And so I'm not sure if there's any Cisco people here who are involved with XMPP grid who would be able to kind of present.
There are other editors that are here in other. There are other editors, like Sinjo Salloway, an editor.
I couldn't remember.
He's here.
But I know Nancy's not.
Okay, all right. Maybe there's something we can do. And I guess if
Nancy is at the meeting.
I saw her at lunch.
She has a flight home at 2.
Oh, okay.
because she thought it
So
was a
her
morning session.
schedule
She
changed.
will not be in the staff session.
She told me a month or a half ago she wouldn't
so she might be here.
Yeah.
Nancy is in front. So.
This is Danny Haynes at MITRE. I'd just add that the ECP mapping discusses some of the TNC and kind of needed specifications, while not, contributions to the working group, kind of working towards maybe seeing if that's something the working group would like to use.
Okay, so the message we are getting is that the XMP, and we know this, that the protocol work in general is kind of late into showing up, and it took time to finish and wrap up requirements, but we are pretty much close, not done, but close to closure. Terminology is something that we'll continue to work with in parallel with the other stuff, and so this is something that will be maintained. So it's probably time to get our resources, or at least part of them, refocused on the protocol issues. And
So my big question is, do we need help in this working group for protocol reviews? I know a lot of folks in this room are very familiar with data models, information models. Maybe there's just not as much of a comfort level, so maybe bringing more people in to help on this, and there might be some overlap with, for any protocol use here, with MILE and possibly any other working group that is exchanging formatted data. And there's different requirements for it, like DOTS has very different requirements than you guys would have. So they may wind up with their very own solution, which is just fine, but there could be some overlap for some of the other groups. So do we need more people that are used to reviewing protocols? Because right now that's my assumption.
Adam Montville. I don't know that I would assume that necessarily. It's a good point, though. I think that we have a hard time looking at more than one thing, and we've been repeatedly asked to parallelize over serialize, and for the number of people that work in the group, it's difficult. So yes, XMPP Grid has been there, and from what I remember after reading it months ago, October, I think, right? It was a good thing to read and a good thing to think about. However, we've been doing other work. So I don't disagree with calling for more participation, certainly not. But I don't think it's necessarily a capability gap within the group. I think it's a time constraint problem more than it is, yes.
Jim Schott. I haven't read it yet. I usually could, but to be perfectly honest, I find that the requirements and the architecture and some other stuff are so fluid still. I don't know that I could actually do a good assessment of whether the protocol meets those documents. I mean, I'm totally used to reading protocol documents. It's what I do a lot of the time.
Yeah, no, I know you do.
But, you know, I can read it. I can tell you it's a good protocol or a bad protocol. That's one thing. But to say it does or doesn't match the requirements means that I actually have to have an idea that the requirements have kind of gotten fixed.
Yeah, and Daro Mascano speaking now as contributors. Yeah, I'm kind of in the same situation. I think that the requirements are actually pretty kind of close, or the big issues are behind us. That's at least my feeling, and of course I may be missing stuff, but the architecture not really. So there is certainly an issue of bandwidth, because there is a handful of contributors in this working group, and not always everybody is available at the same time. So more knowledgeable people. It's not only more knowledgeable people on protocols, or not that much more knowledgeable people on protocols, but understand what are the SACM requirements, what SACM is about. Because if you are bringing like huge protocol experts, but you need to spend half a year educating them about what is SACM, then I don't believe that it's that useful or efficient.
And my reason for that is I think there's crossover between some of these other groups. So I think for the incident response and indicator sharing, I think that's a fit for that group as well because of some of the features provided. So I'd like to get it reviewed somewhere, and that's why I was asking if we had all the right people in the room, and that's why there hasn't been progress.
So we're talking about XMPP Grid specifically. That one.
Lisa Lorenzen, I agree that it would be good to have people coming up to speed on SACM and what XMPP Grid is and starting to look at it. But I also agree strongly with Jim that I don't think that we can approve a protocol until the requirements are fixed. If we can find new people and additional resources to be reviewing the protocol, then I think parallelization makes sense. But I very strongly agree with Adam that we don't have enough resources to play this game much farther, to stretch this game much farther.
So industry has a problem right now, and maybe this room doesn't see it, but the whole info sharing area does, and that was quite evident at the CARIS workshop and discussions there. So maybe this isn't the right working group for it, but I'd like to hear, what this working group thinks about it. Maybe it goes in mile, but I do want to get more eyes on it and soon, because industry's having a problem. I don't want to wait 6 months to figure out transport.
What's the problem?
The problem? So basically, so for the information sharing, there are three candidate protocols. I wrote one of them, and I wrote it 10 years ago, and it's soapy and it doesn't scale. And I recognize that, so I stopped working on it. The protocol that I wrote was called RID. Then MITRE implemented Taxi that looked a lot like RID after they'd written Taxi after implementing RID, and it looks a lot like RID, except it does more SOAPy messages, which doesn't scale. They remove some of the stringent requirements that enabled interoperability, so vendors are having interoperability challenges, and they also allow any protocol to be used, which exacerbates that interoperability problem. Now, they tried to add in things like publish subscribe, which are not native to the HTTP protocol, and so that doesn't scale well. XMPP has some inherent properties that solve these problems. Now, the XMPP grid, the draft is not fully baked, but that's why it needs review, and it needs, it's not adopted right now, right? But there's an implementation, there's at least 10 vendors using it. That's bigger than any of the other protocols. So there's clearly a demand. If it was specified further, then you could have multiple implementations, and then we could get a lot further with this problem because of the inherent properties. So what XMPP does for you is it also has federation built into the protocol, so you could get a mesh grid working, and you have those authentication properties that have already been worked out, and there's 100 implementations of that. And they did it in a smart way in that XMPP is your control channel, and then publish and subscribe are built in, right? So there's a lot of interesting qualities to that. And what I'm seeing is industry is being forced to implement Taxi, and there's only a couple of implementations, and I'm hearing lots of complaints. And I think we can do better because the IETF develops protocols, right? So I think this is an opportunity to take a better fit and move forward with it. And if SACM's not the right place, I want to make sure this happens because there's a problem. You might not see it, but other people in industry see it.
Okay, well, you asked.
Yeah, no, this is Lisa. It is not at all that I don't see the problem. It's that I wanted to make sure the problem I see is the same problem that you see, and they aren't, but they overlap. And I would say that if you say industry has a problem, and I would then say industry would or should be in the room in here looking at the protocols that we're thinking about so that they can tell us whether these protocols will solve their problem.
If industry that I'm talking about was interested in SACM, that might be the case.
They're interested.
This is Lisa again. They're interested in a solution. SACM is one of the venues for a solution. How do we make it visible to them?
Information sharing.
Okay.
Then why are we for this as well? So it's brought in here because it exchanges data.
Microphone.
It's formatted data, right? It applies to both of these working groups. Because you're not ready for it doesn't mean that other people aren't. Okay.
So this is Nancy Camwidget, Cisco. So as one of the authors of the XMPP grid, what I could do to give it broader exposure, it might take me some time, is to submit it because it does have broader applicability. So what we did for SACM was to show applicability of how it's a viable control plane and publish subscribe with once we solidify the requirements, right, for transport. But anyway, so I guess the question and the ask to you as the area director is guidance. We can, as the authors, I can take it back to the authors and say, we can do another submission to show applicability in MILE or, whichever other groups are appropriate.
Yeah. So one thing, I'd like it to stay generic, but show applicability across multiple, right? Because there's lots of different data formats. That would be my opinion. That way it's clear that it could be used for anything. Sometimes people get confused when they only see one. In a draft, and I've said transport should be agnostic. So yeah, getting that update would be great. Thank you. And I'm going to raise this problem at the tech plenary and the CARIS readout. And I want to see what people want to do. And it might draw attention here if the update comes here, or if, collectively it's decided it should be somewhere else, then we do that. I just like to see some kind of action on it because of the problem. And maybe it's not as much of a problem for you, but you also had that November timeline for protocols. So that's why I brought it up, because there was nothing clear on the agenda. I guess ECP mapping has some protocol stuff, so we'll see.
So this is Juan Gonzalez. So I'm a little confused when I heard when you said that the industry needs this solution and industry has a problem. A solution and industry has a problem. But I know that Maya also conducted a vendor analysis for implementation, and where those solutions that Maya provided were implemented across some of the vendors, right? In terms of implementation report. Okay, so that's what I'm referring to. So I'd like to hear more about the vendors, and I'd like to hear maybe not from the SACM working group, but maybe from some other working groups as to what the problem is. Maybe that can also frame the submission that Cisco may be preparing for how the XMPP protocol fits in within the requirements, or what industry needs and what the problem is. So I'm a little confused.
This is Lisa Lorenzen. It sounds to me like so what I want to expand on what I said about overlapping problem spaces. It sounds to me like the information sharing aspects of the industry need are outside of the scope of gathering endpoint compliance information, which is the fairly narrow scope that we defined for SACM. So my question is, since this is an XMPP-based protocol, would it make more sense to do it in a working group focused on XMPP rather than the working group focused on the overall security automation space?
Yeah, no, it's fine to do it in another working group. So you guys can use HTTP as a protocol too for transport, but you don't have to do that in the HTTP working group. You can use other working groups' work. So no problem at all doing that. We do it all the time.
I just feel like there is a push to drive this in SACM before SACM is ready for it, and that, to me...
No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is I want to get some eyes on this and figure out if this is the right place or not, which I thought I made clear. If it goes somewhere else, it goes somewhere else, but there's a problem, and it'd be great if we can fix it and work towards a better solution that meets some of the requirements that industry is complaining about, right? So I know you weren't at the CARIS workshop, but it was a great workshop with people across research, industry, analysis centers, national CSERTs from around the world, really a cool representation, and this was one of the problems that came up. Not saying you have to solve it in SACM, right? It just is a problem, and there was a submission to this working group. So as your area director, I wanted to raise that and see if there's something that this group should do, especially before I go talk about this at the plenary, and would basically leave you guys wondering, why did I mention this at the plenary without first mentioning it here? Looking for help on protocol review to help with this problem space. So this is a heads up, and I'd like to figure out with the working group what to do, or figure out if it goes to a different working group, and see what to do next.
Thanks. That clarifies for me what you're asking for, and I'm not objecting to doing the work. And as I said, I think that it should and could be done in parallel with us working on our requirements, et cetera. The only thing I'm concerned about is the parallelization problem within SACM, given the length of our agenda as it is and the number of resources as it is. So thanks.
Fine. So the chairs.
Yeah, thanks. And what I'm getting here is actually that we need to have an eye. So what we have at this point in time is kind of a profiling. So it's picking the subset and discussing from a point of view of implementation to what respect XMPP grid actually meets the requirements specifically for SACM. Now, this is a subset of a broader problem because we are also dealing with sharing information in the security space. But we are owning only a subset, and while we need to focus on our own charter, we also need to contribute to what seems to be like a broader effort in the security area, probably. I guess it still belongs here. Okay, so Linda, we based the agenda, and you are next with your NIA TNC assessment.
Do I use your laptop?
Yeah, you can use my slides. You need to sit there. Actually, there is, yes. You need to stand within the pink box, and we are going to not move, not breathe.
You have to stay in the pink box. Stand in the pink box. Do I have a microphone?
Yes.
Okay. First, I'm not an expert on the NEA and TNC. This is really a novice view of those protocols defined before IETF93-SACM. I didn't participate in any of the NEA discussion before. So my opinion and judgment may not be 100% comprehensive, and this is really to express a new person's view, a third person view of this, and then hopefully you guys expert can tell me what else I didn't see. This was requested by Dan, asking on the mailing list to compare SACM with NEA and TNC, and since I want to learn all of them, so I volunteered and studied that.
Thank you for doing it.
Okay, so I read through all the drafts, and I find NEA is quite interesting. Has lots of ingredients of the SACM needed, but however, I do see some differences. Like NEA, I see more of like a enterprise. You need to authenticate the software or the viruses or whatever version on your laptop, and they have a way to protocol to check on that, monitor that, and update that. But SACM itself, I find, is a little more than NEA. And not only it does for the endpoint, like your laptop, which is the main primary target device of the NEA. And it's supposed to be for routers and switches and for the infrastructure. So that's the primary thing I see. And so any comments, anything? People may say anything?
Hey, this is Nancy. So the only thing that I see, but I need to put more thought, at least in the NIA side, when we targeted, it is true that we focused on enterprise and enterprise only. Mm-hmm. So we weren't speaking to the notion of doing continuous monitoring. So to me, the difference was more about, NIA was focused more about invoking an assessment for, and the goal and the workflow was to grant access control. That was number one. The other one was we didn't limit it just to what I'll call the leaf endpoints. Mm-hmm. To us, the endpoint included other network elements as well.
So since I saw quite a few of your drafts there as well. So in your view, what is the key differences then?
Shoot, I shouldn't have gotten up. So
because as a new person reading this document,
right.
That's how I
so
see
again,
it.
To me, the biggest difference is NIA was focused on the focus of performing an actual assessment. So defining a set of attributes that got you to an assessment. SACM is more broader, and so in that workflow, we said, what's the end goal of the assessment? Well, the assessment could be for access control, and that's kind of the way we focus NIA. And so if you look at the model, we define a set of attributes, again, for the purposes of defining what an assessment would look like. Okay. Whereas SACM to me is more broad, right, in the sense of you actually want to share the assessment as well as the information that was gathered to achieve that assessment for other applications, not just focused on the assessment.
Okay.
And that's why we've been saying, right, there's a big component of sharing that information, but it's not confined just to the assessment.
So the sharing information is between the controller or manager and the end device, or is
Nope.
it between?
We leave it, well, my interpretation of the charter is that now you have different types of application that may be interested on that. I don't want to say assessment, but again, I'll say loosely posture information. And we may still be debating what posture information may be, right? But it's broader.
Okay. Okay.
Yep.
So it's not limited to a controller manager. Can be any
No,
application.
it could be any application. So
Okay.
now you're talking, compliance applications, assurance applications, vulnerability.
Okay. So
Right.
thank you so much. That helps me a lot. So does that mean that SACM can also use the protocols defined by NIA? Can use some of the things developed by there? Because broader, you can.
It can. It can, but I think it's a subset.
A subset, right? That's what I'm asking.
Again, right, NIA was focused on trying one of the operations, and I'm getting into dangerous ground here because it's some of the discussion on the architecture, but if you think about some of the operations revolving around posture information, one of those potentially is doing an assessment. And so from that standpoint, NIA could apply.
Okay, thank you. It helps a lot. And some of the things are not really carried out in the document, which I read. And just reading the document, that's what I...
Interpreting the charter.
Okay, so next one, compare with TNC, Trusted Network Connect, right? And I find TNC is quite interesting. It's very broad. Reminds me of 3GPP. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that. It defined a whole big grant of framework and structure. And one of them is IFMAP and defining the configuration, how do you manage the metadata access. So in one word, short word, is TNC is much, much bigger framework. And I hope the IETF doesn't do everything as TNC. And then look at the SACM, and I see the architecture is slightly different. It's more focused. Even though I did see one draft using TNC to do SACM, that draft has been expired. I don't know if that draft is going to be continued or what.
This is Lisa Lorenzen. I was one of the authors of that draft. We did not intend that to be a deliverable output of the SACM working group. We intended it to be a suggestion for background for the work that we were doing in SACM to help people understand what interfaces in TNC were applicable to the SACM problem space.
Oh, okay. Okay. Thank you very much. Oh, okay. So that draft I find is pretty helpful. And so my general just novice opinion is they are quite different. It fit into TNC, but SACM is more focused, involved not only the data point but also the protocols. That's it. Thank you.
This is Lisa Lorenzen. I would say to the topic of TNC and SACM, the one way to look at it would be to consider that the policy decision points would be an example of a SACM component, and the access requester or endpoint would be an example of a SACM target endpoint. The map servers would be an example of a SACM controller. So you could consider then that a TNC enabled environment could be used to implement SACM, the concepts that SACM is trying to implement.
Actually, I do have a question. Is TNC widely deployed? The TNC, like I heard many places deployment, they have a small portion of TNC, like not the whole grand TNC. I know network have a small portion of it.
Yes.
Is anybody implementing the whole grand scheme of TNC?
So the TNC set of interfaces addresses multiple areas, as you've pointed out, that some of it is endpoint posture collection and some of it is security automation. There are, as you say, there are several vendors that implement one or two TNC interfaces. There are very few vendors that implement all of the TNC interfaces, but TNC, it's like saying, does anyone implement all of the IETF RFCs?
Okay.
So they're not intended to be an architecture where you must implement all of the pieces to get value. It's intended to be an architecture where there are a number of different interfaces to accomplish different goals. And so the hope is that adopters and implementers would use the interfaces that are relevant to their problem space.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so now it's, I believe that it's Lisa's turn. Take place in the stand in the pink box.
So if you could pull the slides up real quick.
I'm sorry?
I have requirement slides. If we could start.
Oh,
with
you
the
have the requirement slides. Oh, sorry.
They're very brief.
Okay.
They're also already out of date because Jim Schad has been closing issues. Thank you, Jim.
Okay.
So as of Friday, we currently had 20 open issues. We now have fewer, which is nice. The requirements draft 07, which came out after our virtual interim meeting, addressed several of those issues. Some of them more fully than others, according to the response. So we'll obviously need to go back and revisit the ones that are still open. And then there were also open issues that were not discussed at the virtual interim. So we still have somewhere between 9 and 12 open issues to address, and I don't think that, I was hoping to walk through some of them in this venue, but given the time and also given the level of detail involved, perhaps instead of walking through any of them here, we could ask for participants for a working session and go off and work on that and come back with a proposal to the group for ways to address those issues. Would that be an acceptable approach?
Yeah, so what do you plan to do now? We'll go quickly through those issues and...
What I propose to do now is not go through those issues.
Okay.
Get a show of hands of people who are interested in going through them in detail, and then...
okay, so those are like the outstanding at bullet level, right?
These were the ones we did not discuss at the virtual interim.
Okay.
And then there are 2 or 3 more that Jim felt...
Let me ask you, before we ask for a show of hands, assuming that we succeed to get resolutions on, or proposal for resolution, because they need to be confirmed on the list, of course, and then they need to be edited in the draft. That draft would be ready for a potential final last call?
Assuming nobody else opens any more open issues.
That's what we said last time.
Yes, that is the criteria, I believe, is that we have no open issues against the draft.
Okay, so
that's the goal.
Ask your question.
So if you go forward to the next steps, please. I'm interested in holding a working session. Who in the room is interested in participating in that working session? 1, 2, 3. Okay, if you guys could find me at some point and we could try to pick a time so that we could do that, that would be awesome. And then, Nancy, go ahead.
Yeah, so I was going to suggest that Jim be included in there just to make sure that we close the loop. Did you? I didn't. Sorry. Okay.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah, because last time we thought
we
we had closed them, but then we hadn't closed loop, which is why we
Absolutely. All right, and then my understanding is once we have agreed on those in a working session, we can come back on Friday and present them, or hopefully even email them to the list sooner so that we can just go through on Friday and say, any objections? No, good, let's do this.
Even better, yes.
And then we will pull a 08 draft after that, and hopefully that draft will be ready for working group last call. So, we good? Great, get 20 minutes back.
Which you use almost. Okay, so next one is the terminology, if I'm not mistaken. But do we have... there's no deck. Okay, yeah, GitHub. Okay, so we need to get back to GitHub and get to terminology. And the issues, or... also on the screen.
That's okay. I think we will manage. Hi. I'm Henk Berkholz from Fraunhofer and still trying to adjust this. So. Okay. At the moment, I am in charge of the terminology draft, and the short management summary is it is far from complete. There are a few items on the issue tracker on GitHub that relate to sometimes singular terms, sometimes to very large concepts that transcend changes to the terminology draft and would affect basically architecture and information model also. So somehow consolidating this document or this draft will include discussion and dialogue between multiple subgroups. Today I'm going to highlight a few of the items to illustrate in which state the terminology draft is at the moment. And one very good example is a definition of posture, which is a very primarily important term in the Charter, for example. If you could open the corresponding issue. Yeah, we have here a good example what difficulties exist in creating a homogeneous and consistent terminology across all drafts. Primarily, not going through all this wall of text here, it is traditionally we are talking about posture collection and posture attributes, and I think for a year now we are talking about endpoint attributes, and there is no current understanding or current consensus how those terms relate to each other. It is probably apparent that both types of attributes are collected from endpoints. Posture, of course, implies a security assessment context, which is what SACM is about. But also we are talking about endpoint identifying relationship defined at the moment. I suppose that endpoint attributes actually are a more elementary view on the data transferred and are probably AVPs, but also this is not defined at the moment. There is the notion that no raw collection exists, that the first collection from the target endpoint is already an assertion because the endpoint attributes collected, and I'm calling them endpoints attributes at this time, are already asserted to be originating from a specific target endpoint. So collecting is a very raw assertion automatically. And if we take this fact into account, probably AVPs like endpoint attributes do not exist alone, but are always associated with another concept, like in this case, collected from or about an target endpoint. That could be a general nature of the endpoint attributes we are talking about, that everything is also in essence related on an elementary level with another thing, and could be a triple, for example, subject, predicate, object, or something like that. This is a very fundamental observation here, and it comes up if one tries to define the word posture, which is hard. And yes, please.
Lucy Lynch, NSRC. I was also going to flag that in the information model document, in addition to the terms you just mentioned, constellations is used several times, and I don't find that defined anywhere.
Yeah, actually going through the single drafts and sift terms from them that are essential but not handled can be remediated by two obvious course of actions. One is including them into the terminology and solving redundant or conflicting definitions there. Or the harder way around, of course, is adapting existing drafts, which, of course, nobody really wants to do, of course. But at some points, I think remediation due to the via the terminology draft is a little bit complicated, and maybe the hardship of trying to consolidate in there is a symptom of incompatible drafts, maybe.
Yeah, no, in cases where a term is used, either the same term is used in a inconsistent manner, or in cases where there are several names for roughly the same thing, or definitely the same thing, then some level of coordination between the draft, as long as they are at draft level, which almost all our work is now. We have one approved draft, but this exception, I believe, that is still achievable.
It is achievable. We follow two strategies here. We tried to grasp low-hanging fruits, we call it. One of them was supposedly be the managed plane, control plane discussion. I think this is very specific terminology that is not used and integrated into the drafts throughout, widely used. So it's easier to tackle them on the terminology draft. And then on the other hand, something like posture, which is ambiguously used across drafts, or not including a new emerging terminology like endpoint attributes and identifying attributes. Has to be discussed in the subgroups or drafts specific authors first, I think, before a good compromise can be created. Although in this iteration, I think it's 07, is this correct? The newest draft?
Yes.
I introduced a controversial component definition, which tackles architectural inconsistencies and also takes up on information model terminology. But this I would like to highlight at some time of Nancy's architecture time frame, using Jim Schart's example of a repository that does not fit into the diagram of architecture section 3, for example. So, but returning to the definitions at hand, I could give another example for that is unfortunately not a terminology issue, but it is about terminology. It is actually an architecture issue at the moment. There's a very fundamental concept used in the architecture draft that is about subscription and publishing data and the controller broker in the middle. The publish-subscribe concept is not actually introduced in the text of the architecture.
Do you remember what?
I think if you're looking at issues, it is unfortunately not under terminology, but in the architecture, it might be issue 9 or 10.
It was 9.
9. Okay, yeah. So it's a very basic concept that, of course, has a general definition outside of SACM. I think it applies here. But for example, the usage in the text, the term is not introduced properly. It is scattered throughout section 3. I think repository, for example, controller, for example, or subscription is in a subsection of controller, I think, 3.1.3. It is, of course, more important enough to have its own subsection, probably introduced early in the text. That is an issue that is basically terminology, but I'm bringing it up here, although it is in architecture. This is as to highlight how the work on the terminology drafts exceeds the terminology draft, of course. And for this time frame, I will only highlight a third thing, and that is enough for now. I think there will be additional issues, of course, throughout the next iteration. And I will select, hopefully with the help of the work group, more items that are used inconsistently or are just aren't defined at the moment in the terminology. But what I want to highlight is a terminology issue again that is called capability versus functions, I think. Dan?
Yeah. So I was reading your previous one.
Okay. Yeah, I'm hopping topics here, and I'm only
no, that's fine.
Giving an overview, given the amount of time for this.
Okay.
So there's supposed to be a capability. I think it's a very old one, brought down to the bottom, I think.
One more up. What's that number?
Ah, yeah, there it is.
This one?
Two below.
No,
Okay,
yeah, that one. At the moment, capabilities are used widely throughout the architecture at the moment. Yeah, both the different. Let's talk outside of SACM first. I personally perceive function as some kind of software module, some type of feature set that accomplishes something. And related, I personally perceive the term capability as the potential of having this function active. So a entity could have plenty of functions, but not all of them are active, so it has plenty of capabilities. Only a few of them do something as functions at one given time. I think this is a very general interpretation, a definition of capabilities and functions, and to be blunt, in the architecture they are used very unintuitively. I think capabilities is most certainly, as I understand it, the set of types of data a producer of information can provide, probably, maybe even including means of transportation. And functions are at the moment control plane specific items such as discovery or authentication. I mean, of course, those are functions, of course, and I think this definition of function is very easy. But I think functions are not only limited to the control plane, but basically functions can exist and facilitate SACM on every plane and have interfaces, and those interfaces, of course, then again are providers and consumers of information. And this is only an indicator for the next topic I will highlight in Nancy's time frame about architecture. Yeah, of course. Please, if you read the draft and don't understand drafts and don't understand something like constellation, for example, just put a little email on the list or put a little issue into the GitHub tracker, wherever appropriate. It doesn't have to be the terminology draft tracker. Just highlighting confusion and inconsistencies helps us to get this consolidated in the end, I hope.
Now, you started actually your presentation by saying we are not done, we are not by far done. I just wanted to remind that we are not necessarily expecting this document to be done very quickly, if ever, because it's kind of a supporting document. It's our dictionary of reference. We may decide at the end of the road that we are turning it into an informational RFC, maybe also for the purpose of making it a little bit more perine and used by maybe by other pieces of work if it's available. But there's not necessarily a scope to finish it, and certainly not to finish it quick.
This is correct. But I think this is not correct regarding every term. The definition of some terms, especially, for example, second component, which I put in as a point for discussion, is essential for other documents. And if this definition changes throughout the
no. I did not mean that everything is still subject to change forever. So
yes, but the document in itself and its polish of definition, of course, has a larger scope. Yes.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Very good, thank you. Okay, so we are back to architecture.
Yeah.
Grow up.
What?
Grow up.
As in maturity or take your pick. Okay. So how many of you have actually read the draft? Okay. So what I thought I'd do was just try to do a recap of the current architecture, and I could have cut and pasted the text, but this is supposed to be a prettier version of it. So basically in there, and Henk is right, I didn't introduce the terms publish and subscribe because I thought they were self-explanatory. So it's a question of whether I need to make it clear in the architecture versus in the terminology. we need to sort that out. But basically, in the endeavor to keep the architecture simple and define the components, and I'll use the word role, and we can argue about that later, because functions is also not quite right. But basically, the responsibilities that we expect to happen within SACM, when you look at the assertion that we're trying to facilitate the sharing of posture information, the model tries to discuss and focus on that point, and that is you're going to have providers of information, you're going to have consumers of information. How that information gets shared could be, and I started with the term asynchronously versus synchronously, which people had objections to, which got us to the terms of publication and subscription or notification. So all of that needs to get clarified. But then, so that's basically the things that we're trying to focus on is the facilitation of posture information, I'll say availability, and consumption, if you will. So from that standpoint, we knew we had at least two components. Then potentially the third or fourth one that's kind of highlighted as two different structures is the notion of having a management or a control plane to allow us to define the security considerations of who's allowed to be a provider, who's allowed to be a consumer, or potentially both, okay? And then a little more in depth to, as we talk about the different target endpoints, the different types of attributes, the different types of posture information, there may be further, I'll say filtering for now, but from a security perspective, we may also want to provide, and that's why I'm using the word filtering, but from a security considerations, try and limit the type of information that may be disclosed to a consumer or a provider may want to filter from. So from that aspect, that middle arrow is supposed to show that management function, as well as the notion from a data. And so you'll see it called out kind of as two separate blocks in the actual draft, where we're saying there's the notion of having the controller act, and again, this is in an abstract way, to have the controller allow for those management functions such as the security considerations of who's allowed to provide information, who's allowed to consume information, but also from a data perspective, the notion of from a scalability, and again, this gets into some of the implementation and deployment considerations, and that gets to in the data plane, you may also have a proxy. And so in the journey of when we started with the baseline architecture to the last draft, there was discussion of, in the data plane, of that function being either a broker or a proxy, or it could be an interim repository, which I thought is what Jim was objecting to, that the repository is really an entity outside of that function, which is different, that I believe, than Hank, than what you're raising. So, so effectively, what I'm gathering from the comments that we've received so far on the draft, we still have a ways to go to make it clear as to the delineation of roles, and I'll say interfaces. I'm looking at Chris because we were saying interfaces versus APIs. I'm not calling them functions. Okay. So we do need to be clear in the draft and use the appropriate terminology, which I realize needs work in defining what's happening, those that I'm calling out on the orange, the data plane, as well as the control plane. Next slide, please. So my mistake, and if you're a total noob and lazy like me, what I was doing was I was going through all of the notifications to try and respond to them. Little did I know that I wasn't seeing every single issue that was noted in GitHub. So I missed a couple from Hank and a couple from Jim. So there are currently 30 open issues that are of the ilk. Some of them are nits, but there are quite a few significant ones, right? And I'm about to give the floor to Hank so that he can describe some of the concerns that he's raised. But they do go around clarity around the taxonomy and nomenclature that's being used vis-a-vis roles, interfaces, functions, APIs, and so on. And so I've started to respond to some of them, and I realize it was like at midnight last night. So Jim, I don't expect you to have looked at them yet. So we will need to get through them. I don't know whether I'll have time to do a live discussion this week, but if you are interested, I'm thinking might be quickest if I just held at least a WebEx, not this week, but afterwards, because I think we need to close on the requirements first. So if you're interested, just send me an email or contact me. I'll try and linger after the meeting, after this session. But Hank and Jim, definitely I need you guys.
So just for clarification, because it looks like Hank and Jim and yourself happen to be in the same city, which doesn't happen every week or so. So the problem of getting together this week is before of personal busy schedules or during this week?
I have like 5 different working groups I need to track, and I have conference calls from 9 p.m. till 1 or 2 a.m. in the evening. So I'm a little bit challenged.
Okay.
I mean, I can try and put my available times, but like I said, the priority I think needs to go to the requirements because I do think that one is close.
No, we agree on this, but assuming that the requirements get their bandwidth and they've got like I believe something like 9 open issues that hopefully will be discussed, and probably 1 or 2 editing discussion sessions can help us solve, assuming that we find the room for the third session.
Well, potentially, if you guys are around Friday, I may be able to do it Friday morning. I don't know yet. See, Jim is shaking his head no.
This is Lisa. If it is helpful, I could build a doodle poll for the hours of this week, and people could just put their availability in the doodle poll, and that might speed things up.
Yeah.
So I'll build a doodle poll for all of this week. I'll send it out. If you could, when you respond to the doodle poll with your availability, if you're not Nancy or Jim or Hank, let me know which of the 2 topics so far, requirements or architecture, you're responding for.
Yep.
Yeah. And the doodle poll should be like a 3 options doodle poll, so it would be a yes, no, maybe, yeah.
So the biggest one of controversy that I saw, I don't know that it's controversial, but substantial one that I need to discuss is, I think, Jim, you posted the comment of what happens. I don't remember. So I left the language somewhat open in the architecture with respect to interoperability and the fact that we know that there are different data models and interfaces available today for posture information. And so my belief of why we are here in SACM is to define at least one mandatory to implement. Okay? And so from that standpoint, I think that's how we ensure that interoperability. But there was a question raised on the GitHub issue of what happens if you don't support all of them, right? And so my response would be, it's our charter to define the one mandatory to implement, and that defines the SACM compliance. And if you don't, then you're not SACM compliant. So, so there were other issues that need much broader discussion that were raised by Hank that kind of interleave, as he was alluding to, between terminology and architecture. And he had some thoughts that he wanted to share with the group with respect to architecture updates. So I think I'll give the rest of my time to Hank.
Thank you, Nancy. I wish you've grown up. Okay. As a point of discussion, as I indicated earlier, I introduced a definition that is diverging from the other definitions in the terminology draft. It is called SACM component. And could we go back on the slides again to see the pretty picture of, yeah, exactly. So this is the diagram that connects it all. Those are relationships between the interfaces of SACM components. And there is the term repository in the middle of it. And there was the issue raised that a repository is all over the place. It's not only in the center of the picture. It can be a requester, it can be a provider. It, of course, control functions, yeah, basically it can be in every spot in this picture. So to describe a repository in essence, as I take this example because Jim Sharp brought it up, there is more to it than this here. This is only a snapshot of the relationships between SACM components, and there is a process that refines collected endpoint attributes or collected endpoint posture assessments, whatever they're called actually, to do a bigger assessment as a refinement process here. So you have multiple components, most certainly, that transport stuff via this relationship depicted here, but we have no view in the architecture how this distribution between SACM components actually works. There are, of course, two planes here, data plane and control plane, but the fact that the repository could be placed at all of them might lead up to the question, why aren't we able to define a repository as an entity here? Here are relationships between entities because they have somehow interfaces or APIs, things we still have to agree upon which actually they have. But I would like to call them, they have functions that provide interfaces or APIs on specific planes, for example, data plane or control plane. And those functions are defined by those functions are defined by the operations, by the API they expose to the outside to enable other components to find them. And those functions will be the building blocks of SACM components, basically. And this is what I'm heading at. The entities in the landscape that we could compose here could be composable or composite components that are composed of, let's call it features or aggregates of operations that can be provided. Ones. And Nancy indicated this, there could be mandatory building blocks. This is a specific issue for the architecture, I think. What defines or what makes a piece of software actually a SACM component? What kind of operations do we have to provide? What kind of interfaces or APIs bundled into functions do we have to provide in order to be a valid SACM component as a minimal definition here? And then we have an entity point of view, not a entity relationship as it's shown here. And so we could define a repository that has all those functions to be a provider, to be a requester, and to be a broker by combining them, composing them into an actual SACM component. And of course, you can skim this down, having just a control plane SACM component that does authentication, nothing else, has nothing to do with the data plane. So at least there are apparently operations on data plane and control plane that could be distinguished. And I suppose that there are across functionality we want to provide in the scope of SACM. There are more general functions, which means, again, a set of interfaces or APIs that provides operations that are common to the perceived names like a collector, an evaluator, or a repository that is basically an analogon for an IFMap server. And so by having this composition concept, or whatever you want to call it, maybe the composition even is not a good word, a good term for this, but this modularity to compose SACM components and then see how they interact and what they can provide could be a beneficial view for the architecture. And then, of course, the relationship between those APIs, being a requester and a provider on the data plane, for example, can be elaborated as they are now in the architecture draft. But having this a little bit more top-down view of the landscape we compose here could be beneficial to a reader, and maybe even beneficial to vendors who try to become a second component with their CM system or their IDS or something like that. What do I have to put into my machine to be a valid player in the second field? And I think this is a little bit missing from the architecture, but this is only my personal point of view. And I came to this conclusion, as an intermediate conclusion, because I was unable to resolve some discrepancies in the terminology. So this is only an addition to the text that is already there. It does not basically contradict it, but as Nancy would say, it also removes some of the simplicity that is now the beauty of this. But maybe it is helpful to understand how and why we want to use SACM. Lisa?
This is Lisa Lorenzen. I would be really interested in seeing an outline of that section that you're proposing. I think it sounds like a fantastic idea, and it would be helpful to me to see you just do a bullet outline of what you would put into it to make it more clear how it would, what it would contain and how it would relate to the rest of the draft.
Understood. I will try to do this actually this week.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good idea too. So the only concern I had, Hank, was I'm not sure that you're really changing this architecture, but so much doing an example, right? And so doing it as a new section, as an exemplar, I think it's totally fine.
I think it's maybe before this content here. This is very between entities, and introducing those entities just before that. So we have these things, and then those things interact this way. Is maybe that's in my head only.
Okay, so it'd be better if you showed. I mean, it's not just us, but the authors, but the group, the thinking, the outline, and we can go from there.
Yeah, I can
we have this by Friday?
I will not promise anything, of course, but I can have this on Friday, I think.
Well, we never promise anything in the IETF. It's a voluntary organization, but
I will try to. I mean, it will be a rough example, a rough outline, of course. But I hope to capture everything. If any one of you is very handy with the diagrams, ad hoc diagrams, please come to me and help me. Or ASCII art editors. Yeah, that's it basically. If there are no further questions, I hope to provide you on Friday with a better example.
Thank you. Okay, we are done with architecture? Yeah. Okay, information model.
I should not speak after Henk. So the primary progress in the information model.
She pointed out the problem herself.
The primary progress in the information model has been made by the endpoint identity design team, and what we've been doing is focusing up on identity. So Cliff put out a -02 draft that contains some but not all of our thinking there. We realized in discussing how to prepare for this face-to-face that not all of our agreements have made it out of our design team, and so we're working on going through and identifying the proposals that we have made to put them into GitHub as open issues. So that is further work for us. We also realized as we were talking about what our future work is and whether we were close to wrapping up the design team work, we are pretty close to nailing down what we believe are identifying attributes. But we've also recognized that there are two large areas of identity that are not contained in that. Once we know what attributes we want to use as identifying attributes, we also need to know what relationships between those attributes are important. Because there could be a relationship between an IP address and a MAC address. There could be a relationship between an IP address and an endpoint certificate. What do we need to be able to express in relationships to get a full picture of what constitutes an endpoint, and where you can plug into one attribute and get the other set of attributes associated with that endpoint. The other topic that came up as important to identity was metadata about those attributes themselves. How were those attributes observed? What confidence do we have in the observation so that a consumer of those attributes values who's trying to use them to construct an identity can make an educated guess as to whether they are safe to use in that construction. So for example, if you're a device that is dependent on MAC addresses, it really helps to know whether the thing that collected the MAC address was link local to the target endpoint or not. So we believe that these are two areas that need to be clarified before you can safely use endpoint identifying attributes. So we are planning to determine whether to continue that work in the endpoint identity design team, which seems simplest, or whether that's outside of the scope of what we were scoped for, which we don't feel it is, because the scope of our work was figuring out how to figure out identity. So we're giving people an opportunity to say, hey, we need to recharter that design team, or hey, that work seems to fit into that topic. Are there any strong feelings one way or the other? If nobody objects, we're just going to keep doing what we're doing. So
this is Hank Burkholz speaking. I would just consider this an invitation to for other people to join the endpoint ID design team, considering this larger scope, and I would just post an invite for this new scope onto the list, and then I would reuse that context.
That's very helpful, because I do think that this is an area where it would be really valuable to have additional people who've worked with these aspects of identity. How do you construct an identity from disparate observations about an endpoint?
Lucy Lynch, NSRC. In reading through this document in particular, but the package of documents altogether, I feel strongly that if not privacy considerations, at least confidentiality considerations need to be on the table here and very clear. The architecture elides the data subject in the architecture, but the data subject and these highly identified endpoints lead to some at least confidentiality, if not privacy considerations, and I would really like to see that reflected in the documents. There's the word privacy is mentioned several times. There is no description of how that will be handled.
I appreciate the request for it to be covered. It would also be more likely to happen if there was a suggestion on how it can be integrated.
Okay, so Kathleen Moriarty, your AD, that will need to be covered. So maybe Lucy, maybe others, maybe I have some time, but that has to get covered, because once it gets to the IESG, we're going to hold it up on those types of points.
Oh, absolutely.
So thank you very much, Lucy.
I'm not disagreeing that it needs to be in there. I'm just saying the more suggestions we have on how to get it in there, the better.
Yep, I heard.
Cool, thank you.
Hi, this is Hank again. Regarding this specific topic, I think Cliff it was who mentioned that we do not try to compose an identity here that we associate with a target endpoint, but the use of this mechanism is to re-identify something that we want to associate events and other things with. And for this re-association, a pseudonym could be used. I mean, you could hash it simply and then re-identify things with this hash. You would not be able to infer the original data that is maybe the public key, which is, I suppose, a identifying attribute. And so the purpose for this identifying attributes has to be outlined precisely. And I think the primarily use is to identify a object over time, an entity over time, to associate data with it. And for this purpose, a hard identity with all clear details it is composed of is not necessary, maybe.
That's a really good point. I believe that using the term endpoint identity here opens up a can of worms that we are not trying to open. What we are trying to create is not the identity of an endpoint, but a rendezvous point for observations about a single endpoint. And I think that's a critical distinction. So perhaps that's something that we could work on in the identity design team, is how do we find a better word than identity for this rendezvous point? Because I do think that if we call it identity, it will carry all of those implications. And those are implications that I don't think we want. I don't think that's what we're trying to do.
So first of all, call it whatever you want, information model design team, if you want. If you really need a generic name, what's in a name? But make sure that the problem is duly written down and approached.
That's
and
right. I don't need to change the design team name.
Right.
I want to change the content of the spec.
Now, having said this, I think that it is good to have like a bulleted charter for the design team, and this should be, in my opinion, like what are the remaining issues, big remaining issues that need to be tackled before we can say, okay, so this document has covered the principal issues that the information model needs to deal with, and we are ready for a review that may be not the last one, but the one before the last call. Because at some point in time, as we set target for the documents for November for the protocol, by the same time, be it November or sooner or later, also need to have like an information model that we can say, hey, this is our information model. Now people can look and derive data models from it.
So the work until now on the information model has been focused in the identity design team.
I know.
But the work going forward in the information model is broader.
And that's exactly why I'm asking. I think that we need to do kind of revisitation of revisit of the charter of the design team charter, and kind of make sure that we understand what are the goals, we prioritize them, and we do whatever is needed to have a plan of seeing the end.
Right. And I agree that we need to do that. I'm pointing out that that's a subset of also the work that needs to be done to get the information model itself to a point where we can do a working group last call on it. So the next steps that we're working on are pulling out those topics that we want to get consensus on in the group that we believe that we have consensus on internally.
Okay. So can we have a discussion actually this week and present this kind of bulleted plan by Friday? Would this be, yeah?
No, I can't commit.
You can't?
No.
You can commit to discuss this?
Both of my co-chairs all three of my co-editors are not here. I'm not comfortable doing that myself without their participation, and they are all in weird times, or not weird, they are all in disadvantaged time zones. So I am willing to try to pull that together, but I don't know how feasible it will be given the non-presence of...
Just wait for IETF94, and then we can talk about time zones.
So I can make an attempt to coordinate that, but that's
okay.
all I can commit to.
Okay.
Anything
so
else?
Maybe at least launch a discussion on the mail list on this topic.
Yes.
So to get some input this week
okay.
from other participants. Thank you.
Good to start? Yeah, very cool. So I'm Danny Haynes, and I'm going to talk about the Oval and SACM information model. Basically, Mike. There we go. So basically, for the SACM information model, and mapping Oval to it, we published a paper right before the May virtual interim meeting. And really what we want to do is capture the lessons learned over the 10 past years of MITRE and the oval community working the effort, and what types of things we want to do when we go to create the next thing. And so in doing that, we captured that in the paper, submitted it, and we also made some recommendations specifically. So oval consists of 3 different parts. Oval definitions for basically expressing the specified state of an endpoint. Basically, this is the state that you're checking for. We had the oval system characteristics model, which was for expressing the actual state of the endpoint, and then oval results model, which is the analysis of the expected state against the actual state. And when you do that, you get results, and that's the format for it. And in our recommendations, basically, we just said the definitions model and the system characteristics model would probably be good starting points for both evaluation guidance, collection guidance, and expressing posture attributes. However, due to issues we ran into with the oval results model in the past, we don't really recommend that SACM would use that. So in here, we just kind of wanted to give a quick update of basically what happened since then. And so if we're on the next slide, I guess we're already on that. I thought we were in between slides, so go up one more. Yeah, sorry about that. So basically, we pushed out a message to the list, asked for some feedback, and there's decent amount of feedback. We'd definitely like to see more. We'll get into the major discussion topics in a minute. Jerome Mathias was kind of pegged as the official reviewer for the effort, and I think at some point we'd like to hear his opinions on it, and kind of help the working group form an opinion on using oval. So we can go to the next slide for now. And basically what the topics ended up with was, the first one was inclusion of other standards and efforts. And so there's one question about, have we considered using SciBox, which is another effort that MITRE and DHS have worked on for expressing cyber observables. And with oval, we kind of basically modeled, information that could be collected off the endpoint ourselves. And, SciBox is very similar to that. Slightly different domain, but definitely some overlap. And we definitely, really agree with this comment, and we'd even maybe suggest further that there's even other data models that we may want to support. Things such as DMTF-CIM, maybe Yank models, and things like that. We definitely want to be able to support writed data models, because one thing we learned over the years of moderating oval was that it's a lot easier to give vendors options and not force them all to change what they do to map to just a single specific data model. So it's definitely something we'd like to look into more there. Another issue was scaling while using oval, and this really breaks down to 2 different areas. There's scaling of the language itself. So one of the challenges with oval over the years was that every time you need to check a new platform, you need to check a new piece of posture data, such a registry key, a process, or something new for some new system that came out, you have to add a new test or new capability. And in order to do this, for a long time, we used a kind of a monolithic release process, and that really made it, the time to get these features out to vendors to implement a lot longer than needed. So that's definitely something we wanted to address, and the oval board, which is kind of an advisory body for the effort, is working on kind of improving those processes and really trying to expedite these things so these new features can get in much more quickly. And then the other aspect of it is really just kind of using oval. So oval consists of XML documents, and really these documents can get very big and complex. If you ever looked at one, it's kind of scary. You jump back and forth all over the place, makes people's heads hurt. And the challenge is we have our data model, that's what it looks like, and you can use it. But when it goes into practice, whether it's people writing content or tools processing that content and then outputting results and things like that, there's a lot of ambiguity in the language and a lot of opportunities for optimization as well, and just kind of that broad spectrum of all these different opportunities for differences and stuff like that has made interoperability not as good as we liked. And so definitely, scaling up, it can definitely be a challenge there. And that kind of covers the complexity of old definitions. It's kind of a related topic. Really the big thing we wanted to get to here was, so this old definitions model, embedded in it is not only you express what you want to check on your endpoint, but also how to collect it. And really in doing so, it just adds more complexity, and it makes it more difficult to do things like you should be able to just go and collect data off an endpoint and go stick it somewhere and be able to evaluate it later. The single definitions model kind of makes it seem like it all kind of happens at once. And one of the things that SACM has really pushed for is separating evaluation and collection, so we definitely want to go ahead and do that. And then lastly was the level of abstraction for platform-specific extensions. Like I said earlier, basically, each of these extensions, every time you have a new platform that comes out, you may have to add a new one. It's possible that you have certain capabilities like netconf or WIMI or PowerShell commandlets that allow you to gain new capabilities without really adding new things to the language, because these have the ability to access these data stores for these particular platforms. And so that's definitely one thing that's definitely nice, and we have added them to Oval over the years, but typically we have really wanted to kind of just model the data on the endpoint. So for example, you want to model a process, a registry key, a file, an access control list, things like that. And rather than these collection mechanisms, just because we felt it made things much more clear, made the content more readable, and things like that. But definitely we supported both, and there is flexibility in that, and that's something we'll have to decide as a group if we decide to use it, what approach we want to take. So next slide. So next steps, there's still some open threads on the mailing list that we need to resolve. I think we still have some questions we had out to the list that we'd like to get answers to, and then I'm sure other people have other questions that they'd like to ask, so we just got to kind of follow up there. If you guys have any more feedback, and read the draft, definitely let us know. Definitely be excited to hear what you have to say. And then based on all that feedback, we'd like to go ahead and update the draft, try to make things clear if there's additional information we should put in it. But really the big thing we want to focus on moving forward is try to help, if you guys have questions about Oval, get the information out to you and then allow you to form an opinion as to whether or not you'd like to use Oval in SACM. And if that's something you'd like to do, we'd definitely like to work on a plan for getting it in here and moving that forward. And yeah, I think that's kind of where we're at.
So Kathleen Moriarty without a hat, I'd like to see that happen.
The plan for moving things forward?
Yes, yeah, I'd like to know what it is. Well, you said if there's interest, so
yeah.
I think there is interest, and hopefully other people are interested, but are you going to speak or do a poll or something here?
Yeah, I was going to ask what's the best way to do that.
Cheers.
Sure. Just because we are kind of start to deal with documents and standards that are being developed by other organizations, has anybody looked at the IPR issues?
Well, why not?
So Kathleen Moriarty, AD, why don't you let us know of any IPR? Like, how would it get transferred in?
Juan, do you want to take it?
Oh, okay. Great.
So this is Juan Gonzalez with the Department of Homeland Security. The Department of Homeland Security owns the IPR, so I'm working with the lawyers to get that transfer over. So we have been discussing
working with the lawyers is the IETF
and
legal?
with the IETF. So I'll be working directly with the IETF to make that happen. We have a tentative date of July 31st, which we have discussed with the OVAL community to get that happen. So I'm working towards resolving that issue first. The IETF issue is going to take a little longer, but I'll be working on that. So that we don't anticipate any issues. We already have an agreement in place that's been reviewed. It's just getting the final approval by our lawyers. So that shouldn't be an issue.
Great. And please do let me know how to help, or if you need any assistance
Absolutely,
from myself, the lawyers here, whatever.
Good.
So this is Lisa Lorenzen. Would the outcome of this then be an OVAL data model, or would it be incorporating concepts from OVAL into the existing information model?
So
or
our
both?
recommendation was basically to take the OVAL data models and use them as a starting point. Obviously, from the lessons learned and just from the documents within SACM, we'd have to make some modifications there. Definitely things we could do to simplify things. So we'd like to do that. But I think, maybe getting if we can get exception, I guess, for, people wanting to use the data models, then we can go from there. I think, updating the information model will probably be important because I know for a fact, I think we don't have definitions of like evaluation guidance, collection guidance. So that's maybe something that we could work on.
In the information model? Or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because OVAL represents a data model for those things.
Right. And that's the part where making a new data model from OVAL makes a lot of sense and is somewhat standalone. Incorporating some of the concepts from OVAL into the information model is work that would need to be coordinated with the ongoing discussion about what needs to be done to the information model before we
Yes.
finalize.
I know that Dan is participating in the information work and information model work, and I'm assuming that he's explicitly or implicitly factoring in some of the information already. But at some point in time, when we decide to take this as kind of a formal actions, and we need to see how those are merged and what kind of extensions, or maybe we need to work with two documents, or one core document and one specific profile that is an OVAL profile. We need to see how this is factored in.
Yep.
Makes sense.
Nancy again. So I have a logistics question. So we're putting requirements together. And so for proposals for things like the XMPP grid and for OVAL, since they're going to be data models, we need to have some criteria or some section in those drafts. And I know I put something in preliminary since we don't have the requirements yet. But we need to have some process, I guess. Sorry, I'm asserting. The question is, should we have some process, right, that says how the proposals match against the requirements?
Yes. The answer is probably a little bit too early to tell, but not too early to discuss, because we are kind of assuming that we will have rather sooner than later the requirements document in a stable, last called, maybe submitted to the ISG format, so that will be our reference. And now we'll go to the phase where we need to have the discussion about selecting the protocol and selecting the data model or the data models that will instantiate the information model. And at that point in time, we really need to have this discussion. If we can figure out this earlier and you have the bandwidth to discuss this, that's fine. If not, we can kind of cross that bridge when we reach it. But it's still kind of finalizing and approving last calling the requirements is well as kind of closing the details of the architecture. Very good.
That's
Thank you.
all I got. But
Thank you.
Yeah, I think I'm up for the next one as
Yeah.
well. So
I know.
all right. So the next topic I'd like to discuss is mapping ECP to SACM, and kind of this whole session in the internet draft that we published before the IETF 93 cutoff really builds off of a draft that Jessica Fitzgerald McKay published, which basically introduces the NIA and TNC specs and kind of how they could be used as part of SACM, of course, with modification, much like OVAL. And so really in this document, we wanted to kind of take that a step further and build off of and kind of look at the SACM use cases and show that the NIA and TNC architecture protocols and interfaces can be used to satisfy those use cases in kind of high-level requirements. So that's what we did. That was the main focus. As mentioned before, there is IPR associated with the TCG TNC standards, but much like NIA, they have in the past been willing to publish and share these specifications. So if it's something the working group would like to use, we can go to them and try to see what we need to do to make that move forward. Next slide. So ECP is called the Endpoint Compliance Profile, and really what it does is provide kind of guidance as how to take the NIA and TNC protocols and interfaces and use them to get compliance health reports for endpoints. And it kind of does so looking at making sure that they're uniquely identified, that they're authorized to join the network, kind of like Linda was talking about with and Lisa as well with the comply to connect kind of use case there. And then also that they're running compliant software that is up to date. And the version of ECP that's out there right now is pretty focused on, compliant software and making sure it's up to date and information about that software. But it's meant to be extensible to support other types of attributes. So if you read that, don't think it's just focused on that. It's definitely made to be extensible. So the next slide. So kind of just, this is more of a refresher as well. What are the different standards that are in ECP? The first is NIA and TNC architecture, which is used for being able to assess endpoints and monitor their compliance. There's the interfaces for IMC and IMV. IMC is Integrity Measurement Collector, which is essentially something that collects attributes off an endpoint. IMV is an Integrity Measurement Validator, and that's what does the assessment of the information collected off the endpoint against some expected values. There's PA-TNC or IFM, that's a TNC specification or a IETF NIA specification, and that's really defines the format for the messages that will be transported back and forth between the client and server. PB-TNC is responsible for, the actual protocol is responsible for taking those messages and moving them back and forth between the client and server, specifically the collectors and the validators. And then lastly, there's PT-TLS and PTE, which is basically what the protocols that provide the security for those protocols in the stack above it. And then lastly, there's this TCG server discovery and validation specification, which is responsible for ensuring that when a client goes to connect to a network, it's talking to a server that it trusts and can validate it that it trusts it. Next slide. So in this particular document, we looked at the four SACM use cases, as I mentioned. The first one is really, focused on, defining actual security automation data and then being able to stick it in a database and be able to query it and publish it depending on your particular use case. In the document, we did not call it out as its own section, and we didn't talk about that particular use case because it didn't have maybe such the most exciting story. However, we did touch on it for the following 3 use cases as a critical part, because we expect that in the second, third, and fourth use case that it will be interacting with a repository or CMDB, however you want to call it. And so that would definitely be a part of that. The second use case for SACM was endpoint identification and assessment planning, and that's really basically, looking to see, collect posture information off the endpoint in order to determine, can it be on the network, and also just that information can be used to identify that endpoint on the network. So it's definitely useful there. And one of the big things we've kind of stumbled across in that endpoint identity design team too as well is that this identification or the posture attributes that are collected off the endpoint can be used to both obviously identify the endpoint and then doing things like targeting, figuring out whether or not it needs to be assessed based on its software inventory or particular setting it has. So it's definitely something to consider there. Then there's endpoint posture value collection. That's just collecting the endpoints off the endpoint and sticking. You can either send them off for current, for use right away, or you can stick them in a CMDB. And then lastly, there's posture evaluation, which is the analysis of the actual values against the expected values, and then taking that result and initiating some follow-up actions, whether it's remediation or it can be kicking the endpoint off the network or something else. And I'm not really going to go into the details of kind of the story behind each one and which protocols and interfaces fit into each of those. I kind of leave you to go read the internet drafts that explains it in much more detail than I have for the 10 minutes that I have right now. But that's kind of just an overview of that. And then, so we can go to the next slide. So more importantly, we really want to think about why do we care about ECP? Why do we care about these NIA specifications? Same with the TNC specifications. Well, they definitely can be used to solve a big part of what we need to do, and that's basically assess an endpoint. It may not have everything we need. We definitely understand that we probably would have to make some modifications to get it to fit and do what we need in SACM, because as we mentioned earlier, SACM is much broader than just that. But really, these specifications are already out there. Vendors, to some extent implement them. The IETF ones we can just use. The TCG ones we can use, but if we want to bring them into SACM, we would have to get approval from the TCG. But as I mentioned earlier, they've been willing to do that before, so that's definitely something positive. And then lastly, we really don't. There's already a bunch of standards out there. If we can reuse existing ones and kind of focus on that, we don't want to compete. Create competing standards. It's just a lot more work, and we'll have 5 vendors doing one, 5 doing another, and a bunch of unhappy customers. So I think that I'll get one more slide. So really, the specs are out there, all freely available for people to read. Linda signed up for reviewing it, and I think we definitely would like to have others review the specifications to see what they think, and I would encourage you all to do that. But at the end of the day, we really want to determine, I think, as a group, do we want to use these specifications, and do we want to take an action item to start? If we do, because as I mentioned before, we to the T thing. If we want to use them, we probably want to do sooner than later. And then, lastly, if we do want to use them, there's probably some updates we may want to make to the architecture document. I could see definitely wanting to take these specifications and show where they all fit in to make it clearer for people, so they can, because the architecture is good, but it definitely helps to have something a little bit more concrete. I know, at least for me. And then lastly, just, once we get that similar to Oval, have a roadmap for getting these things into the working group, if everyone wants to do that. So I think that's all I have. I don't know if we would like to do a similar call for, I guess, if we're interested in using these specifications.
Yeah, so I guess that my question here is, let me put different. In the case of Oval, we have quite a well-defined and let's say, determined community that seems to be interested into kind of mapping the work between the two, and actually I may ask differently. How do you see this first next step determine if we want to use the IETF, NIA, and the TCG, TNC specifications in the context of SACM? I believe that you mean here, of course. How do you want to make this determination? Because we have like a subset that is like 2 or 3 people right now that know at a reasonable level both.
Can you say that again?
I'm sorry?
Can you say that again?
How do you suggest to do this first? To do this to make this determination?
Well, I definitely think be useful for more people to read the specifications if they feel so inclined. But maybe one thing I think it would probably be helpful. Yeah, so those are just kind of backup slides showing.
Yeah, I was looking if the backup slides actually include also a list of referrals, of links. So that would be. I know that at some point in time we had this published on the mail list, but probably
I can follow up and send them again.
Yeah, send it again. That would be yeah.
But maybe it would be. Would it be helpful, I guess, for the group if we went now from so we kind of mapped them to the use cases? Would it be useful if we map them to the architecture, if we feel comfortable doing that? I know we obviously have some more changes to make in the architecture, but I think for maybe some of the major, the bigger components, we could probably start to do that.
Okay.
Would that be helpful?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, Chris.
So Chris Anasio, Carnegie Mellon. All right. So I guess I'll cut to the chase. The TCG and the Oval would seem to be kind of conflicting in cases. If we say yes, let's adopt Oval as the basis, and let's adopt the IF map, etc., as a basis, then what?
So I will say that with SCAP and Oval, really there's no architecture. It's just a bunch of data formats, right? So it's definitely would be a work in progress.
So have you guys done the work where you attempt to see what the TCG/NIA, the best things it has to offer versus the lessons learned and the things that Oval has to offer, and done any kind of thing where you've merged that with some kind of hybrid? Or
we have not done that yet.
Okay.
We've just done the lessons learned from Oval.
Okay, thank you. So I guess that we are at the final fun point about recapping what is the plan for the week.
Thank you. Great. So yeah, I can try to go back through some notes because I was actually writing some things down. So I think that we're going to have some requirements discussions throughout the week. Is that correct? And Lisa, I believe, is going to try to lead that effort, requirements.
Yes.
There were people interested in that. So then on Friday, we'll be able to have basically a readout on that, like a disclosure of what happened, and then we can take all that goodness to the list and hopefully find some zero issues in GitHub, and consensus on the requirements would be nice really soon. We wanted to, let's see, you were going to build a doodle poll also for a couple of other reasons, right? And what was the other reason, though? It was architecture also.
Those were the only two that I heard. I don't know if there are others.
Terminology issues exist as well.
Right, and terminology issues, and there is one more related to opening at least the discussion, which will probably not be able to finish, but opening the discussion. Yeah. No, it's opening the discussion on the architecture, the open architecture issues.
Opening up, going through the issues.
Yeah.
Yeah, discussion.
Yeah. Right. And that was also a kind of a mail thing because we want to involve people who are not present here.
So that might change the agenda a little bit on Friday then. We have requirements, architecture, information model.
Yeah.
So we'll switch that up.
Right, so we'll focus on requirements.
Yes. It's good?
Good.
It's good. Everybody saying blue sheets?
Blue sheets, please, where they are. Thanks, everybody, for coming, and I guess we'll see many of you on Friday.
Thank you.
You guys have always had it at 9.
Yes, but this time we donated time because the 9 session was a 2.5-hour session, and we were asked kind of squeeze, and because we didn't really use the time in the last few sessions, we didn't use the full time, so we said, okay, we are candidates to squeeze. And squeeze we are, but in the last session.
So, yeah, these guys are really nice to give back all the time to.
Okay, I'll take this. Yeah.
Sorry, you're very late. I was looking at the time. I'm looking at the crowd. I don't see anybody.
If you have comments on the issues and you have time today to sit down and send any comments by email or put them in the gift box, you can certainly consider whatever.
I'm not from Open SFD. I read that, and we definitely get more involved with this, I think. And unfortunately, I got to do it very late. So I read those reviews, so much stuff.